Ladies and gentlemen, please have a seat. Are we ready? Welcome, my fellow HASP scholars. A line I've stolen from Fred Johnson, by the way. Let's do a little housekeeping first. We all have one of these. Please put yours on silent. It's very disruptive to speakers if it goes off during their presentation. Those of you who have not had their photographs taken for the directory, after we're done today and after we stay for voting on the Constitution, go out and get your photograph taken, please. We have over 30 new members. It's going to take too long to read their names because we want to spend more time with our speaker. But their names are behind me on the wall. We have over 10 guests today, too. So HASP continues to grow. I think we're at 753 active members as of today. A second reminder, the submissions for the HASP review are now being accepted. You can find out how to do that through the HASP happenings. There's a link there and information. Or you can talk to Ralph Fairbanks and he will give you all the information that you need. So those of you who are artists and poets and writers, feel free to make your submissions. Quote of the day. You know I like to do this. I thought it would be appropriate for our topic, too. Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Thomas Edison. Now, how that applies to a binary brain, I don't know, but perhaps Gary will fill us in on that. Which brings me to Gary. Gary Morris is our speaker today. He is an expert on artificial intelligence. Gary has a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics from Michigan State University in 1967, an MS in engineering from the University of Pennsylvania in 1986, and a PhD in artificial intelligence from the University of Pennsylvania in 2008. He has spent 32 years working for the IRS, ending as the chief of the Artificial Intelligence Lab in Washington, D.C. Now, David Blatt assures me that Gary is a dynamic speaker. As a matter of fact, to quote David, he won't quote himself, if Gary was giving a speech on paper clips, David would sign up. So prepare to be entertained. Please welcome Gary Morris.
Am I on? Okay. Okay. Well, good morning to you all. This being an academic group, I thought I would follow a normal academic outline. So, as you know, we'll have an abstract, a body, and a conclusion. Or as a friend of mine put it, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. So I'm going to follow that model today. Here is my abstract. Artificial intelligence is showing up everywhere. It's a fast-spreading and disruptive technology. Now, there's an iron law of technology. We always overestimate the impact of a new technology in the short run and we underestimate the impact in the long term. And that's true. But that implies don't overreact early. Just keep an eye on the long term. But today I'm going to argue exactly the opposite. Even though we can't accurately predict AI's long-term impacts, we should not delay in responding to the immediate issues as they present themselves. Our responses are important, not only because they deal with the immediate problem, but because they're establishing an environment in which the future impacts of AI will or maybe will not happen. Now, let's get a few terms straight and set the limits on what we can talk about in the short time we have. There are 5 basic types of AI. There's natural language processing, understanding and generating English or other languages, machine learning, which happens to be my favorite, computer vision, planning and decision making, and robotics. Now, most of what you've been reading about and seeing lately has to do with natural language processing, speech recognition and generation. If you have an Alexa or any of the other voice-operated devices in your home, you know that those devices are sometimes frustratingly inaccurate, but for the most part, they can understand almost anyone with any accent of any gender speaking English. That is an amazing accomplishment. Text understanding and text generation, if you've played with ChatGPT or any of its cousins, you know that that has become amazingly capable. And there's even automated translation. As you know, you can use Google Translate to speak in English and have the system translate that on the fly to any of dozens of other languages. This is stuff that was considered to be almost impossible 20 years ago, and now we accept it, and in fact, it comes for free on your phone. But I want to point out that machine learning is kind of the secret sauce underlying most AI, because even though machine learning was one of the last areas to become really a hot topic, it is now the hot topic. Now, when you read the newspapers or watch on television, if they talk about artificial intelligence, they're almost always really talking about machine learning. In fact, a special type of machine learning called deep learning. Now, deep learning is simply machine learning that uses neural nets, and I'm not going to explain those, that are absolutely gigantic. When the neural net is large enough, it is called deep learning. And these things are truly huge. I would love to tell you how they work, but we don't have enough time even if you stayed until supper. But AI is broader than just neural nets. Now, neural nets are underneath a lot of what you're seeing today. In fact, they have been underneath the headlines, in a sense. Self-driving cars, well, that's a very concentrated form of planning and decision-making, and guess what? The best approach to building self-driving cars turns out to use machine learning. Industrial robots. Robotics has been around for several decades, but it turns out the best way to train a robot is simply give it machine learning tools and let it watch a human. Machine learning is detecting disease in PET CTs and MRI scans, or from reviewing your medical records. Now that's machine learning on steroids, and it's having a real impact on people like me. I'm a cancer patient, and AI has helped to keep me alive. Of course, voice recognition and Alexa, Siri, and all of that was accomplished with machine learning. And in fact, even identifying cat videos can be done with machine learning. Now, there are some big picture questions that I would love to talk about for several hours, and we're not going to. They're just beyond the scope of what we can do. But the big picture question that most of the world is focused on when you talk about the dangers of AI is a super intelligent AI an existential threat to humanity? There are a number of very bright people who say yes. My answer is, well, it depends. Is a super intelligent AI even possible? And what does superintelligence mean anyway? No one's come up with a really good definition yet. Now, there are some tasks at which machines are already far superior to humans. If you don't believe it, challenge your computer to play chess with you or Go. It'll beat you so bad it's pathetic. But there's a collection of related tasks, like, for instance, self-driving cars, where we are making progress, but it's very, very hard. Super intelligence in a car, that's a long way off. Question: is a person who's smarter than you a threat to you? Well, it depends on their goals. Is an AI that's smarter than you a threat to you? Well, that depends on its goals. But a huge research question is looming before the whole industry: how to even build machines that can understand human goals. And if they could understand them, could they absorb and accept human goals? How would you express the goal of do unto others as you would have others do unto you in computer language? Any volunteers? And even if you developed a machine that was capable of understanding and accepting those goals, if that machine is going to become smarter and smarter as it evolves, how do you make sure that its goals don't evolve in ways that we don't like? All of the current debate about the, quote, robot apocalypse hangs on these very difficult questions, these great unknowns about the goals of a superintelligent AI. And we just don't know the answers. So I'm simply going to leave that topic by saying, stay tuned, but don't expect anything to happen very soon. These are very difficult questions, and a lot of very bright people have spent careers working on them, and they're still working on them. So today we're going to focus on the immediate, foreseeable impacts of AI. And by that I mean the current scientific consensus on either what is being done right now or very near-term capabilities that AI might have. Now, again, remember, we always overestimate the impact of a new technology in the short run, and we underestimate the impact in the long term. Some things that appear to be rather limited and focused today will turn out to have very broad implications. If you don't believe me, just take a look at that smartphone in your pocket. Now, new technologies can also sneak up on us, and that smartphone is an excellent example of that. After all, when it was introduced, it was simply a better way to make phone calls and a way to see your voicemails. But now it is the indispensable tool of almost everyone. So, where is artificial intelligence affecting us now, or where will it very soon be doing so? The short answer: everywhere. In the language arts, journalism, email reading and writing, if you read the newspapers, you have already read text that has been written by an AI. That's particularly helpful if you like to read out-of-town sports scores, because they used to employ people who would sit there and look at all the statistics for a baseball game, for instance, and then try to write about what happened. That's all done by a machine now, and it's done very well. Academic essays, reports, popular literature, I don't have to tell you about that. The newspapers are full of all those stories. When you use internet search, you are using AI. It used to be that internet search was simply a matter of database searches, and it has been found that using machine learning, neural nets, is a much more efficient way of doing search. Automatic translation, we've talked about it, even computer programming. It turns out that people who are writing computer code can these days use AI tools that allow them to simply write a comment that says, here's what this routine is going to do. And the AI can write the routine. Pretty helpful for people in my business, at least. In finance, already AI is driving a lot of what's going on in the stock markets. You remember the flash crash? That was caused because some automated trading tools had some bad assumptions in them, and you saw what happened. Whenever you apply for credit, the odds are that your credit assessment's being done by a machine. Investment strategies are being generated for large brokerage houses by artificial intelligence. In manufacturing, robotic assembly is something that is slowly but surely pervading industries. They now talk about lights out factories, factories where you don't need to have the lights on because there are no humans inside the building. Now, you may think that that's a little bit of a fantasy, but the UAW does not. They were willing to shut down the industry for 6 weeks because they are very much afraid that building cars may quickly become a lights out operation, and that is death to the union. Warehousing. Most warehousing these days uses some form of machine intelligence to actually do the distribution of items on the shelves, to retrieve the items, and to deliver them, pick them out, recognize them by sight, deliver them to humans who can do something with them. It's even possible to take computer-aided design documents and convert them automatically into production sequences that can produce the device that was designed. No human involved. In medicine, robotic surgery. I've had some, I'll bet some of you have. Disease detection from images and scans. It is now the case that in determining one kind of cancer, breast cancer, there are machine learning tools that can look at a PET scan or an MRI and do a more accurate job of diagnosing early breast cancer than a human. Of course, humans are still in charge of that process, but nonetheless, the machines are already better than people at that task. Analyzing electronic medical records. Well, if your doctor had time to review everything in your record, plus a few million other people for comparison, they could perhaps do a better job. But that's beyond human capability. It's well within the capability of machine learning. It's happening now. I think one of the most interesting uses of AI is in drug discovery. It has been long the case that the drug companies claim it just takes an enormous amount of work and millions of dollars worth of professional effort to find a new drug. And that's partly true. It is the case that there are hundreds of thousands of different drugs that might be useful in treating a particular disease, but how do you assess all that? Well, by trial and error, it takes a long time. It turns out that there are AI tools that are capable of simulating the effect of a particular molecule or protein on a target disease. You can test tens of thousands of potential drugs in a day. That is currently reducing dramatically the amount of time to discover some drugs, and this appears to be something that's going to be sweeping through the industry. In transportation, of course, everybody says, where's my self-driving car? Well, in Phoenix, Pittsburgh, and San Francisco, robo-taxis are running now, or at least some of them are. The state of California, you may know, just revoked the license of Cruise Automation to run their robo-taxis in San Francisco because of a bizarre accident. We can talk about it during Q&A if you want. However, in Phoenix and Pittsburgh, there have not been any problems. But there have been so many problems in San Francisco that the city is suing the state, trying to get all of the robo-taxi licenses revoked because they said it's just causing too many problems. Stay tuned. But this is one of the hardest problems the AI community has ever taken on. Full self-driving is something you can buy on a Tesla, but it's still a difficult goal despite Musk's claims. But there is progress. It has been shown that Teslas being driven by humans have more accidents per 100,000 miles than Teslas being driven by full self-driving. So the machine is already better on average than a human driver. Interestingly, most of the self-driving experiments going on, and all of them, the ones in San Francisco, have resulted from large teams of computer scientists trying to figure out what a car should do in each situation based on the sensors and the LiDAR and the cameras. And that approach has gotten them quite a ways. But there's a company in the UK called Wave that took a different approach. They installed some machine learning software in a car, took it out on a country road and said, drive. And it was terrible. They had to intervene several times a minute to keep it from going off the road. But they just told it, learn from your mistakes and keep going. Within a month, that car was capable of not only driving all over the country roads in England, they took it into a city, and it performed quite well. After a couple of weeks in the city, they took it to another city it had never seen before, and it did very well there. That machine learned how to drive on its own by trial and error, kind of the way teenagers do it. Now, if you're waiting for your self-driving car, it may be a while, partly because of the economics. But if you want to look around for where the economics are best for self-driving, look at all those trucks on 196. Because adding $8,000 worth of cameras and sensors to your Ford Escort may be a little bit of an excess, but adding it to a $250,000 Kenworth, not a problem. And that truck is going to spend 99% of its time on the interstates, which is the easiest place for self-driving to work. In fact, my Ford Blue Cruise does just fine on all those roads. AI is also impacting the military, and this is an area that gets scary. It's already the case that we have in the U.S. arsenal autonomous missiles, autonomous drones, autonomous ships. We even have mules. Those are things that look like mechanical dogs, but you can put a backpack on them, and they can carry all the heavy stuff for a soldier. All that stuff is already here. And the prospect of automated machines that are authorized to kill, it's on the horizon. It's being debated. There are strong arguments against ever allowing a killer robot to be created. But on the other hand, if you have to have a war, wouldn't it be better to have machines knocking each other out instead of people killing each other? It's an intense debate, and it's going on right now. There are some really thorny social issues, like, should you allow a machine to win an art contest or an Oscar? AI is already affecting our democracy. Every candidate would love to be able to identify who are the people that maybe are not going to vote for me right now, but if we were to somehow influence them, target something directly to them, their vote could be switched. For humans to come up with that kind of a map of anything, even as small as Ottawa County, is really impractical. But there are machine learning technologies out there that are already capable of doing that, identifying down to the individual level who is likely to be a swing voter. That is going to change how democracy works. In education, as many of you know, AI is already a very controversial topic. On the one hand, you can use it to personalize education. There are already software programs out there that can adapt to the student in such a way that if the student is a slow learner, it takes longer to present the material. If the student doesn't do well on a quiz, it analyzes why it didn't do well, goes back and represents the information in a different way, and really brings the student along just like an intelligent tutor would do. That's a wonderful thing. However, some teachers see AI as simply automated plagiarism. After all, you can write a very fine admissions essay using ChatGPT. You can write a very fine essay on almost any topic you can name using ChatGPT. Now, the people over in the physics department are snickering and saying, the language people are just having their calculator moment. Because back when calculators first came out, all the mathematicians and engineers said, this is terrible. They're not going to know how to use a slide rule anymore. Remember slide rules? Well, what happened eventually was they figured out that the calculator was simply a tool, and instead of trying to ban it, teach the students how to use it responsibly, and it can make them better engineers. They're waiting for the language people to figure that out. Well, I've just surveyed a whole bunch of social impacts. How should we respond to these things? My argument is, it's got to be one issue at a time, because every issue in particular is going to have its own parameters, and there are no generic solutions to AI's introduction into our society. What you're going to do in an English essay class is very different from what you're going to do in the Pentagon. Each problem is going to have to be addressed one issue at a time, and please, promptly. Now, we also need to be aware that when you're dealing with a particular technology, even if it's AI or something else, you got to be aware that that technology is going to continue to evolve. So as we address these issues, we've got to be aware that we're setting precedents that maybe seem excessive now or maybe seem too lenient now, but 5 years in the future, those precedents are still going to be influencing how we behave, and we need to know that the AI will not hold still for 5 years. There are also some economic issues, and these are ones that I find particularly interesting. A big one is the cost of deep learning. I mentioned that these days most machine learning is done with gigantic neural nets. Well, right now, only wealthy corporations can afford to build those things. Building a neural net may often involve literally billions of mathematical parameters trained on gigabytes of data. Just the computer time using cloud computing, the computer time to create that net can cost millions of dollars. Well, who can afford that? Also, there's not a whole lot of people in this world that know how to design and build these deep learning programs. And these people command pretty good salaries. And they all want to work for the best companies in the best environments. So are we creating an exclusive club where only the wealthy can afford to do this kind of AI? You know, innovation quite often doesn't come from big corporations. It comes from startups, rogues, people that say, I can think of a better way to do that. Startups. Well, if deep learning is a tool that only the big boys can afford, are we stifling innovation? An even more direct economic impact of AI is the simple question that a lot of companies are facing now. Why should we hire humans? We've seen this movie before. Detroit's population was 1.8 million in 1950, and now it's less than 700,000. That's strictly the result of automation in the automotive industry. And that was automation that, frankly, wasn't all that smart. Automation is now affecting lots of other things, including wine picking in Italy, harvesting grains in the Midwest. The impacts are potentially much larger. And it has local impact. You remember this headline? That tripling of the size of the LG battery plant here in town. They got a big contract with Toyota, said they were going to make the factory even bigger, but there would be no additional human hiring. They just don't need the people because the machines can do the job more cheaply. This is a flyer that I found that was passed out by a company that was trying to sell a very expensive machine that could do the same work that was being done in a particular factory. And they pointed out a number of advantages of automation versus the manual labor that was currently being used. Now, the machine cost $500,000, but it could do the work of a number of human workers. And they pointed out, yeah, machines work 24/7, so you don't have to worry about how many to hire, you only need one. And you only need one technician to support multiple machines, and that's a much better job. But please note what else these people pointed out in their flyer. There are additional costs of human labor beyond simply paying the salaries. There's employee turnover, there's workplace injuries, absenteeism, human errors that have to be repaired. The costs of human workers are significant. And if you have a properly functioning machine, those problems do indeed go away. So you might ask, why hire humans? And it gets worse. I mean, that slide showed you what happens when you replace medium-skilled factory workers. But AI is today replacing high-skilled white-collar workers with high salaries and expensive benefits. And what's worse, you know, replacing a welder in a factory may require a fairly expensive machine. Replacing a human sitting at a computer just takes software. One of the biggest costs of hiring humans is payroll taxes. They are a percentage of what you are paying the human worker. Now, AI systems currently don't pay any payroll taxes, and they don't unionize, they don't get pregnant, they don't take weekends, and they don't file grievances. The bottom line is, currently, our legal and tax systems encourage replacing humans with machines. So the question is, are humans going to suffer from technological unemployment? Are humans going to become not worth hiring in certain industries? Well, it depends. When we had a sudden loss of 25% of the jobs, it was called the Great Depression. But earlier in our country, we had the gradual loss of 90% of the jobs in one huge industry, and it didn't cause any problems at all. It just caused social progress. Those were farm jobs. You can't see the small print on this, but the lower graph is showing the percentage of the total U.S. labor force engaged in agriculture. In 1800, it was almost 80%. By the year 2000, it was way less than 5%. So, AI's impacts on employment maybe will be 25% in a year, maybe will be 90% in 200 years. It's going to be somewhere in the middle. And where in the middle? That's what policy will determine. That's what voters and legislators will determine. Now, when technological unemployment occurs, it isn't just the worker that suffers, because society loses when robots replace humans. Employers currently withhold and remit to the government income taxes on the workers' earnings. Wage earners have very high compliance with tax laws because they have no choice. The boss took it out of their paycheck. If a person loses that paid employment and becomes a gig worker or unemployed or self-employed, historically tax compliance of those groups are far less. So when you replace human taxpayers with machines, even though those humans continue to earn money in some way, the government's revenues suffer. If you have 1,000 white-collar employees in a community, they inject a great deal of energy, a great deal of resources into that community and make it a better place to live. If you replace them with a collection of AI systems and a couple dozen system operators, that community is going to suffer, not just from the loss of income from those employees, but from the non-monetary contributions that those employees make to the community. So, technological unemployment is a huge economic issue. Here's one particular example where I'm going to deviate from my high-level overview and actually suggest a solution. That's the Social Security crisis. As I'm sure you know, Social Security is not an insurance program. It was sold that way to make it easier for people to accept charity. But the fact is, it's simply a system of transfer payments, taking money from currently employed workers and giving it to retired workers. So, the ratio of current workers to retirees is crucial for the system's financial health. Well, in the year I was born, 1945, there were almost 42 workers for every Social Security retiree. By the year 2010, that had dropped to 2.9 workers per retiree. And 2010, that was before the boomers started to turn 65. This year, it's about 2.5 workers per Social Security recipient. That is not very many workers to support a retiree, especially if I'm the retiree. And yet, look at the goods and services per retiree. In constant dollars, you can see that it's been going up almost every year. 2020 was the midst of the pandemic, so there was a little dip. But nonetheless, the goods and services to support us are growing, even though the number of workers producing those is shrinking. What happened here? Well, one could argue that it's robots to the rescue, because humans and their machines have produced all the goods and services necessary to support our lifestyle. there is therefore a pretty lively current debate. Should we be taxing robots? Hey, some pretty smart people, including Bill Gates, have publicly called for a tax on robots, and there are a number of good reasons for it. One of them is that government needs income taxes, Social Security taxes, etc. When you replace humans with machines, that cuts tax revenue. Furthermore, right now, with robots not paying taxes, the tax incentives encourage replacing humans with machines. A tax on robots might help to slow that down. And furthermore, when robots replace humans, that usually causes an increased need for government spending, even at the same time that tax collections go down. And finally, if you tax robots and slow down technological unemployment, that's going to make it spread over more years and make it more manageable. So those are all good reasons why we should tax robots. But there are some people that say, no, taxing robots is a really stupid idea because automation increases productivity. That's how the smaller number of current workers is able to support the goods and services for all of us retirees. The productivity of the average human worker went up. So if we tax robots, that's going to slow down automation, and that will slow down productivity growth. And there are some critical industries that depend much more on automation than others. If you tax robots, that's going to hurt those industries more than others, so it's unfair, they say. And there's always the question of how you're going to define a robot. Is an automated welding machine a robot? Is software that picks stocks to buy and sell a robot? How can you write a definition that tax lawyers can't make a game out of? And some would say, hey, despite all this talk, the robot apocalypse hasn't happened yet. Maybe we're all just being Luddites. Well, I think the definitive argument is the one about the definition. If we try to tax robots by defining what a robot is, the tax lawyers are going to have a heyday. Well, I have a modest proposal. Value-added tax. That's not a new idea. It's been around for a long time. If you're not familiar with it, a value-added tax simply says a producer adds value to a product. It combines or processes inputs and produces outputs, and they get sold. Now, if there were a 5% value-added tax, a producer's tax is 5% of its gross sales minus the tax that was paid on all of its inputs. So that's the same as 5% of gross sales minus the cost of goods sold. The key thing is that with a value-added tax, no matter how the output is produced, by humans, by robots, software, lab rats, sheer dumb luck, doesn't matter. However the output is produced, the tax is the same. So replacing workers with automation does not decrease tax revenue. And furthermore, replacing human workers with automation doesn't reduce your value-added tax. So the financial incentives to replace humans with robots is significantly reduced. Now, the tax is not like a sales tax. It's not added onto the sale price. It's built into the sale price. So an extractor of resources from the earth or any producer that has no inputs pays a tax on their gross sales. Now that means that almost every industry would be paying value-added tax. It would be a very broad-based tax. Now, my suggestion is, as a modest beginning to this kind of an idea, why not use a value-added tax to replace Social Security taxes? They're currently 6.2% on employee plus another 6.2% on the employer. Now, in heavily automated industries, they would be more severely affected, so we would need some transition rules to soften and stretch out the impact. But nonetheless, the disincentives to hire humans would be immediately reduced, and the tax advantage of robots would be decreased. And since no robot definition is required, the VAT would apply to all industries, including services. So even the value added, so-called, by Wall Street software would also be taxed. Optionally, if it's a value-added tax on all industries, you could adjust the rate up and actually eliminate the Social Security financial crisis. No one's been able to come up with a plan yet that could pass Congress that would do that. I would argue that, in fact, if a value-added tax were used to replace Social Security taxes, that could be done. There are some legal issues for AI. One of the big ones you'll read about in the newspapers right now is who owns the training data. Now, in the good old days, like 20 years ago, old-fashioned AI was done this way. A company would decide they want to create a machine that can do certain things, and they would write computer code that causes the machine to do those things. That code was their intellectual property. It's their property. They owned it, and that was the end of the issue. But now we do things using deep learning, huge neural nets, like ChatGPT. Well, now a company creates the neural net or just uses open source code that's already been made available to create a large neural net. And then they go to the internet and scan billions of training examples automatically just by scanning every single web page out there. No humans are involved in finding the data or in vetting the data to make sure that it's accurate. But the originators of that internet data are neither consulted nor compensated. As you're probably aware, content creators are suing OpenAI, Google, and the others that have created deep learning systems, saying that they're using their intellectual property without permission or compensation, and in their lawsuit, they're asking for damages. Those cases are still pending. Probably it's going to take years to resolve those issues. But it's a serious issue. Who owns the training data? Because the training data is the fuel that makes deep learning work. Another issue, can you sue a robot? Here's a scenario. A self-driving car crashes into a human-driven car. Now, the owner of the self-driving car doesn't have enough insurance. So the human driver claims, well, it's all the self-driving car's fault. But the data logs of the self-driving car show that it did everything it was supposed to do. Therefore, it claims the human driver is at fault. Well, there's always a lawyer in the background that's just really eager to sue somebody for a whole lot of money. The AV company says, hey, we sold a tool that functioned properly. Now, we're not liable unless you can show that our tool did not do exactly what it was supposed to do. How are you going to solve that problem? What are going to be the rules for who's responsible for a mistake made by an automated vehicle that's owned by me, built by him, sold by her? It's going to take a while to work that out, but we better get started. Here's another example. As it's already been claimed, self-driving cars are in general less likely to get into accidents. In fact, many people believe that once we work out the kinks, and it's going to take a while, but once we work out the kinks, you can save tens of thousands of lives every year by using self-driving software rather than human drivers. After all, a machine doesn't get distracted, doesn't fall asleep, doesn't try to watch movies. Michigan might decide that automated vehicles can save 3,000 lives annually. Of course, the 3,000 people whose lives were saved will never know it because the accident never happened. But the legislature would acknowledge that there are still going to be some accidents, and 300 people will lose their lives in accidents involving automated vehicles. So, what legislation should govern the rights of those injured? If someone's injured in an accident and it's someone else's fault, our society says you have the right to sue for damages. But whom do you sue, and how do you balance the fact that those 300 deaths were the price we paid to save 3,000 lives? Now, I think there's a hint as to how you can do that. We can talk about it in the Q&A if you want to. But that problem came up, 150 years ago when automation hit factories, and we developed something called workman's comp that has pretty much solved that problem. Legal issues. Can AI research be regulated? Well, if you've been reading the newspaper, you know that that is a very hot topic right now. The European Union thinks so. In June, they adopted their, I think, revision 3 of their AI law. And if you have read it, it is a very comprehensive law with teeth in it. The U.S. Senate has decided that they can't afford to remain ignorant anymore. They are having workshops for senators that have been going on for at least a couple months now, and they will continue, in which the senators are being taught what AI is, how it works, and what the issues are. Because these folks are going to have to vote on laws that may or may not regulate AI in an intelligent way. As you probably know, there was President Biden's Halloween executive order. Now, there are limits to what the president can control, but he wrote his administration wrote a very extensive AI regulation, which they hope can begin the process of regulating AI in the United States. We can talk about the details in Q&A if you want to. But the big question is, if we regulate AI research in the United States, is that simply going to drive people to Canada or Mexico or who knows where? And some research is simply thought. Can we really regulate thought? And how are you going to detect a violation? How are you going to tell when somebody is experimenting with something with an automated system that they're not supposed to? How do you enforce it? Do you throw someone in jail for doing an experiment? These are thorny issues. They're issues that are going to have to be settled by government. And we ultimately decide what the government is and what they do. There are some technology issues as well, and I'll conclude with these. As you all know, generative AI, in other words, things like ChatGPT, can hallucinate. That's a nice name for lie. ChatGPT-4 will make up scientific papers and results and cite them as the basis for an erroneous conclusion. If you ask it to write a scientific paper proving the Earth is flat, it'll do it. And it will cite Professor Smith, whose paper proved that it was true. Generative AI, or any deep learning tool, is the product of the training data, and that was scraped rather, shall we say, without much human judgment from the internet. As we all know, saying it must be true, I saw it on the internet. Yeah, all the biases, all the errors, all the conspiracy theories, all the outright disinformation get swept up into these databases, into these deep learning tools. So, if you ask an image generator to draw a picture of a doctor, it's going to draw a white male. Now, there is some progress being made because this is a very sensitive issue. One of the companies that produced these large language models, OpenAI, they've done a lot of work trying to correct for the common biases. So it's now true, if you use ChatGPT 3.5 or later, if you ask it to describe a doctor, it will actually give a race and gender neutral word picture. Now that's real progress. That's getting rid of a very common misconception on the web. On the other hand, Alexa recently claimed that the 2020 election was stolen because she found it on the internet. Another technology issue, and this is a big one, is how you're going to audit or understand the output of these large neural nets. After all, a deep learning net may have billions of parameters spread over hundreds of thousands of layers, just a huge mathematical mess. Well, if that mathematical mess says it's going to rain tomorrow, how can you understand the basis for that conclusion? Well, maybe you don't need to, but what if it says stage 1 cancer? You really need to know why it said that, and right now it is impossible. That is a huge technology issue, and it's something that's got to get fixed. A black box AI is just not as useful as one that can explain and defend its outputs. That's something that your kids can do, but right now a neural net cannot do. Now, there has been some progress. I mentioned that firm in England that taught a car to drive by letting it simply make a lot of mistakes. The engineers wanted to know how that was working, and they did something very clever. They hooked ChatGPT into the self-driving software in such a way that now the engineers can ask, using their voice, why did you make that left-hand turn? And the system can actually generate a response explaining What was the reason for the turn? That's far from the whole answer, but it is progress. And the big technology issue that I mentioned at the beginning, creating AI goals that are human-friendly and human-controlled. The huge research question is, how are we going to build machines that can even understand a human goal, that can absorb that goal and accept it as the governing principle of its operation, and can retain that even as it grows more and more intelligent based on either improved algorithms or better data. Frankly, there's been little progress so far. And yet, until that problem is solved, all those big picture problems really can't even be addressed. And finally, how do you test an AI to assure that it's safe for humans? Who should be trusted to do the testing? Well, Garfield the cat has an opinion on that. If you can't read it, Jim says to his cat, I read an article that said AI is taking over the world. That can't be true, can it? And his Alexa says, why, of course not, John. So my conclusion, AI is showing up everywhere. It's fast spreading. It is disruptive. We've got to deal with it. And even though we can't accurately predict the long-term impacts, we dare not delay responding to the immediate issues. And that's because, as I said before, the responses we make to the immediate AI challenges and problems now are going to shape the environment in which AI will continue to expand and grow. And the future impacts of AI will, or maybe will not, happen. So, that task I will leave to you. I'm retired. I'm not sure how much time we have for questions, but I've been told we have a little bit. So there are some roving microphones starting to move around. David has one. If you have a question, raise your hand and wait for the microphone. Question or comment?
I think you alluded to it kind of tangentially, but can you talk about the impact of AI on wealth discrepancies or wealth disparity?
Impact on wealth inequality, in effect? It's in one sense, it is not unique to AI. AI is an automation tool, and it has been the case for at least the last 150 years. Those who own the tools tend to get the lion's share of the profit from those tools. Those who simply work alongside the tools usually do not. Again, the UAW has made that point very clearly. AI is capable of becoming a partner, and those that own the AI or those that purchase the AI certainly have the option of sharing the benefits with their human workers. But that is not a technology issue. That's a corporate governance issue.
I want to commend you on an excellent superlative delivery.
Thank you.
However, on content, you left out two of the most important degrading issues and dangerous issues for AI.
Do I have to guess?
Second most important one was the use of history. If AI is allowed to use history, you're going to have wars and genocide that you won't believe. But the most important one is, where is the element of God in AI? Give us those two answers, history and God.
I will instantly become very wealthy. You raised two excellent points, and I do not have an answer for you. In terms of AI's dependence upon history, I certainly would agree with you that one of the big problems with AI is that it's It's the slave of the data used to train it. So to the extent that the data used to train a neural net contains the history of wars and oppressions and genocides and everything else, and that is considered to be normal history, you're right, we have a bias built into the system. It is possible to control the data that goes into a neural net. That takes a lot more effort, and it's going to give you a less capable neural net, but nonetheless one that has been shielded from certain kinds of bad data. A few companies are trying to do that. One of them, I mentioned OpenAI, has tried to cull out certain kinds of racial bias and gender bias that they find in data. Obviously, that's not the complete answer to your problem.
My question is, and this is probably maybe a funny way of asking it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. In a book called Electric Railways of America, they discuss the problems of Kalamazoo of 1913. And the doctors in the city council were totally emotionally immersed over about a 3-month period on the topic of what are we going to do 15 years from now? That's 1913 plus 15 in 1927, 28. What are we going to do about the diseases spread by horse manure? Well, obviously, by 1928, there was no horse manure on the street. Are we talking the same story today, similar to that Kalamazoo story? The changes are occurring, but it's going to be like the Kalamazoo story.
You make a good point. Certainly, if you try to predict the future simply by extrapolating today way into the future, you make a lot of mistakes, such as those Kalamazoo doctors. On the other hand, if it appears that a technology is going in a certain direction and that direction has some problems or some issues, I don't think we can just say, well, that's a horse manure problem. It'll go away due to some technology we don't know about yet. My argument is, as AI issues present themselves, we've got to deal with them because we can't rely on gas-powered cars to come along and get all the horses off the street. Yes, that happened, but there are a lot of cases where the predictable result, in fact, happens. Question back here?
There's a lot of concern being expressed now regarding keeping AI under control or make sure it's not used for inappropriate or criminal purposes. And it's hard for me to believe that Congress would be the right governing body to regulate that, since they can hardly even keep the government running. And I would think it would probably be something more like a network of interdisciplinary stakeholders. And the question is how, I think you would have an opinion on what type of a governing body should regulate that, but also there's a question of, should the regulation just be within our country and then the UK has its regulators and then China has its regulators? Or should there be some type of international union of stakeholders who have input on this issue?
Oh boy. Well, you raised 2 points that I'd like to address. The first one is that you ask, how can we keep AI from being used for bad purposes? And I think the answer is that's extremely difficult. And the perfect example is just as soon as AI systems were developed that can manipulate images, we come up with deep fake porn, about as terrible a use of AI as you can imagine. AI is a tool. It can be used by good people to do good things and can be used by bad people to do bad things. I don't know a way to change that. On the issue of who do we trust to write the regulations, who do we trust to make the rules, I wish you were wrong about Congress. I don't know. There was a conference in London, I think, last week, in which a number of nations got together to talk about that problem. The U.S. was represented, several European countries were represented, and several Asian countries. And they all agreed on a statement of principles. But it was pointed out that those same countries have agreed to other statements of principles that they promptly go home and ignore. I don't know who is the right governmental body to try to make these rules. History tells us that the most effective mechanism for controlling behavior between countries has been international treaties, often sponsored by the United Nations. The UN is not yet addressing this issue, and if they try to, they're going to run into all kinds of sovereignty questions because China, the United States, Europe, they all want to dominate AI. They see it as the goose that's going to lay the golden eggs for many years. Getting those nations to accept restrictions on their sovereignty, on their use of resources, on their research, is going to be a really tall ask. But my personal opinion is, unless there's an international treaty proposed, we're not going to get anywhere.
I think you sort of just answered this, but the American Actors Guild is now involved in a strike because of, in part, because of name, likeness, and image. The producers using people's likeness and image without permission or without compensation. Do you think it's possible to control name, likeness, and image with AI?
Is it possible to control NIL with AI? It's easily possible to violate it with AI. As you know, there have been at least 2 movies that have come out in which an actor was, through AI, regressed to an earlier age. And the image that appeared in the film was that actor at an earlier age, and it worked. It is quite possible that some years from now, it would be possible to have a movie starring Tom Hanks and Julia Roberts in which those 2 actors had no role at all. It would all be images. So AI is the problem there. I don't think it's the solution. There's going to have to be some law or some contract that specifies, if you use my image in a film, here's how much you have to pay me. Here's how much of the residuals I'm entitled to. We're a long way from reaching that, but I think probably the strike has helped to raise the issue. That's not much of an answer, but it's all I've got. How are we doing on time? We aren't.
We are finished. Gary, when you give that talk on paper clips, I'm signing up. Please stay in the auditorium for a moment. We need to update our Constitution. You've all had a chance to read the Constitution. It was sent to you by email with links, and it's been in the HASP happenings. Just to give you some background, the last time Constitution was updated was 2016. So this is long overdue. The process began in July. Since July, the current Constitution that you read, that was on the links, has been reviewed at least 6 times by myself, by Claudia, and by Scott. It has been furthermore vetted by the Executive Committee unanimously and vetted by the Board of Directors unanimously. Now, vetting it means they approve it, but put it into action requires a vote of our membership, which we will do today. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or Claudia and Scott. If there are no questions, I will put this to a vote. Seeing none, we'll do a raise of hands. Those in favor of accepting the current revisions of the currently revised Constitution, please raise your right hand. I don't think I need to count. Are there any opposed? Our new Constitution is now official by unanimity. Thank you. I will see you all in December. We'll have another great program for you. If you haven't had your photograph taken, do it today. It will go in the directory. And happy Thanksgiving to everybody.